Hi everyone, it's Kathy with Do the Local Motion Tampa Bay. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really fortunate today because we have Joe Gross and Lori Moreda from the Hillsborough County, and they are going to host our tour today. We've taken it on the road. We're out of the city and into the county. Thanks so much for joining us. Please enjoy the tour. All right, well, we're here with Joe and Lori. And Joe, do me a favor and tell us a little bit about your background with the county and being an arborist.
Well, currently I'm assigned to code enforcement, but prior to that I had the fortune of being with Natural Resources, which is part of Development Services, for about 5 years. Natural Resources is responsible for the enforcement and protection of trees like the one behind us. And I'm an arborist for about 20 years, a master gardener, and also a master naturalist. And all of those things come into play when you're talking about preserving trees and vegetation.
Awesome. Okay, Lori, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I've been with Hillsborough County over 35 years. I've been an arborist for 15 years. I've been with Development Services for 15 years, and I work with a great team of people who work to preserve beautiful examples of grand oaks like this in Hillsborough County. This particular oak was preserved by a cooperation between our reviewers and the developer to relocate buildings and move things around in order to preserve this beautiful tree.
It's gorgeous, and you're guessing it's probably about
I'm thinking about 150 years old, but there's no way to tell. There wasn't aerial photography 200 years ago, and the only way to definitely know would be to cut it down and count the rings, and we're not going to do that.
And tell us about the story behind this tree. When they came in to develop, what was the process? What steps did they have to take? Because think of us all as being novices, which I am. I'm clueless, but I find it so interesting. So give us a brief.
Beautiful piece of property. A developer buys it. They know that it's going to be a great place to build homes for people because homes are in demand in Florida. So they come to Hillsborough County with plans. We work with these developers to review the plans. We tell them that this tree is a grand oak, and if you want to preserve it, we'd be very happy, but if you can't preserve it, there are mitigation that goes into play. Probably too much detail for anybody, but it would behoove them to keep it financially, so they did, and they made quite a specimen of this tree. They incorporated it into a play area for the entire community.
How fortunate these people are here in the community to have this beautiful
Absolutely.
tree.
It makes these homes so much more valuable. It's so much more curb appeal. There's so much more appeal for families, especially during the pandemic. You can come out here and enjoy this.
Absolutely.
And not have to worry about anything.
Awesome. Joe, tell us a little bit more about this particular type of oak.
So this is a live oak. This is one of the biggest, largest trees that we have in our landscape in this part of Florida. And it's home to a lot of things besides just the tree itself. We can see here resurrection fern. One of the reasons it's given this name is after a nice rainstorm or a heavy dew, all of this will green up to a beautiful color, and it just comes back to life. Right now it's kind of in it's more in the drier stage, although it can get looking even worse than this. In the background you also see an epiphyte known as Spanish moss. This is unlike what's been told about full of mites and things like that. And while it's still on the tree, it's a nice place for things to live, and it feeds off the air. It is not parasitic to the tree. Over here we have some lichen, which are indicators, not that the tree has any problems, but it's actually an indicator that the air quality here is pretty good. I think this type of lichen is called Baton Rouge, and it's a combination of fungus and other things that are kind of come together. But it's living on the outside of the bark, and again, there's no parasitic relationship. In fact, it's more symbiotic.
Interesting. It's beautiful. And it's so nice too here. I mean, they have this gazebo here that they can utilize and just sit out here and enjoy the beautiful tree. Great. Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to head out to our next location in the county. Tell me where we're going now.
From here, we're going to head over to a Target down at Brandon Town Center.
Okay, great. We are actually now filming from Target parking lot in Brandon, and we're going to hear the next preservation success story of this beautiful live oak and how its life was saved with a little bit of extra work. All right, well, Joe and Lori are going to tell us the success story here of the preservation of this beautiful tree. And I believe it all started with the parking lot, correct? Having enough parking space for the shoppers.
We wanted to include this one on the list to show that unlike some of the landscape islands we're familiar with that are kind of small and postage stamp size, sometimes you can save something of this grandeur by giving it more room and incorporating features like these paver blocks so that the root system has a little more room to expand. An oak like this in nature would have about an acre's worth of root system if you include the feeder roots and everything else. Whereas this has been vastly reduced. This plaza is decades old and yet the tree is still doing quite well considering.
So if it needed an acre worth of space for the roots, that will shorten its life somewhat.
I would be surprised that we'll ever see this tree attain the size of the first tree that we looked at in Mango.
And what would you guess the age of this one is?
Well, we know probably we're looking at something at least in the 50 to 75 year range, I would guess.
Interesting. And it's so interesting about these pavers because we've seen them all over, but I never understood the purpose or significance of
Pervious pavement to allow more rainwater to get to the roots that have already been reduced.
That's great. It's awesome because when we go shopping and we pull into that parking space, we don't always pay attention to the beauty that is actually surrounding us. And so I really appreciate you all bringing our attention to this and sharing these great success stories with us. Anything else to add, Joe?
At this juncture, it might be important to point out that one of the things we look for when we're requiring landscaping is we want some diversity as to what is put back. So you can see the use of palm trees in the background, some crepe myrtles in the medians, some 2 anchor magnolias on either side of this particular entrance, and a wide array of landscaping that's used around the tree and around the plantings. It's also interesting to point out, while it was not required, that the developer and the operators of this location recognize the significance of this tree and have installed decorative lighting to feature it.
Wow.
As
So it's lit up at night and
Exactly.
a kind of a highlight of the parking lot.
Precisely.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Considering it's a well.
Yeah.
We're at our third spot off of Fletcher Avenue, and we're going to hear the preservation success story of these trees next. All right, Lori, tell us how this became another one of your many success stories for preservation of these beautiful trees.
Well, this is not my success story. It's Hillsborough County's success story.
Exactly.
This site was, the grade was much lower. If you look down in this well, there's at least 4 feet that the natural grade of the tree occurred. And in order to preserve the tree and to allow for parking to develop the property, they had to create this retaining wall. And in this system, since the majority of the canopy was going to be covered in asphalt, they installed what we call a wane system. You'll see these little circles.
So drainage.
These are little pipes that go straight down and straight over, and they allow rainwater to come in and oxygen to be exchanged to help its limited root system. They are typically in a semicircle orientation. Here's one, here's one, here's one, here, 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 and they go around in the arc. There's actually 2 rows of them here. When they're properly maintained, they will allow the tree to get extra water, nutrients, and oxygen to its root system. It's a very limited root system.
And how big would this root system be?
They extend at least 2 times the canopy of the tree. So at one point, probably a good 2 acres.
And how long has this system been here, do you think, the drainage, the Wayne system?
The Wayne system's probably been here 20 years. Whenever this complex was developed, it looks to me to be probably mid-90s.
Yes, and the tree has outlasted the business, it looks like.
Sadly. Businesses are having a really hard time these days.
I know.
At least the tree's thriving.
Exactly, it's a beautiful tree.
Also has some pruning. If you notice on the one big lead, lots of the little sprouts that are coming directly out from the edge of where she was pruned, those are called epicormal sprouts. Those are a response to somewhat improper pruning, dormant buds. When she gets a little sunlight, the tree is just trying to grow more foliage so that she can produce more sugars. She also has the beautiful resurrection fern.
Yeah.
So the next time we get a little bit of rain, it'll be a beautiful green fern blanket all along that major lead.
So does the fern grow throughout the year then, since or just really mostly in our rainy season in the summertime?
It's always there. It's
yeah.
always growing, but it's typically only bright green when we get some moisture.
Okay.
And it is epiphyte. It is not any sort of, like a mistletoe. It's completely harmless. She's persisted with small sable palms all around her base, and she's probably close to 60 or 70 inches in diameter. Really nice tree. I'm glad they saved her. Despite all the grade changes, she's done fairly well.
What about flooding and hurricanes? I mean, do you know of the water getting up all the way that full?
Well, a properly designed retaining wall, tree well, Wayne system will not allow water to
stand at all
in that well.
Oh,
because
that's
that
great.
will kill the tree.
Yeah.
Tree roots need to exchange oxygen. So.
But
if
does it have to be maintained on a regular basis to
It's
make sure?
supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything you do to a tree, you're supposed to maintain it. Wayne system, cable brace, lightning suppression, they all should be maintained by a certified arborist over the lifetime of the tree.
Well, great. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Tell us a little bit about the pruning of the tree.
So when you have this interface between development and the existing trees and the urbanization is taking place, you're not only dealing with the root systems and the change of grade, but you're also having to deal with the vertical system and the conflicts that can arise from vehicles and things like that. So this tree had to be pruned quite a bit, and we featured live oak a lot today, and one of the reasons it's preserved so successfully is the tree has a capability to withstand this kind of stress. And so when the cuts are made, it's important that they may be made properly. So you can see where the one up there is completely healed up. This one is in the course of healing up, and that's a pretty large wound. But when the cut was made, now it's buckhorning over and closing that wound. So sometimes when they're too large, it's a race between closing the wound, if it's even able to, and starting to see some internal decay. Now, live oak is very resistant to decay, so the likelihood is that it won't get too far into the trunk. But you can see that this tree has a pretty good history of being able to close some pretty significant cuts from the past.
So interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, this preservation area shows a mixture of the new and the old, which is really beautiful to see. So tell me your thoughts on that.
We wanted to include the site because, first of all, it shows that we've been to a lot of sites where the story is one of years ago, but this is an active site underway. Construction is going on. But one thing we'd love to see is a multi-generational grouping of trees, again with some diversity, so that if you walk on the site and you were looking strictly at the trees, you couldn't necessarily date it just by what is planted. And I think that's a success story, is when you've got keeping what was existing, working in new generations of trees that'll be the grand oaks of the future, and having this combination.
I love it. So interesting. It's beautiful.
Also brings attention that now we know so much about the structure of trees that they're required to meet certain standards so that we don't have problems for the ultimate owners to have to deal with pruning. So this has a nice single trunk, a nice balanced array of limbs. It's required to have a certain density of foliage. Right now it's strapped just to make sure it doesn't go over in high winds, but eventually these will be pulled off.
How long do those stay on?
Usually 6 months or less. Sometimes we have to come back around and remind people to take them down.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. Lori, tell us a little bit about the landscape requirements and some of these new community developments and what's required or restricted.
In Hillsborough County, we require each unit have a shade tree. And if a shade tree is not possible, they have to have ornamental trees, like the Japanese blueberry and the holly. When there's overhead line restrictions, which is not the case here, they cannot have large growing trees, so they would have to have an ornamental, a smaller growing tree. We require that it be Florida Grade 1 or Florida Fancy. That way the homeowners aren't saddled with some sort of problem later on relative to the growth pattern. We don't want the homeowners to be saddled with a multi-trunk nightmare that's not going to enhance the property or the neighborhood.
Exactly.
This here is a beautiful Magnolia grandiflora, and I would say this is a Florida Fancy. This is one of the best examples you'll see of a magnolia.
It's beautiful. And will it grow anymore, or is
Oh,
that?
absolutely.
It will. Okay.
They're slightly slower growing than oaks, but the beauty with the magnolia is you don't need to prune them. You should leave them with their limbs this low and not bring them up, because then they will also give you privacy.
Right.
They're perfect to plant in your front yard if you happen to have a bathroom in the front of your home, which a lot of the 90s and 2000 homes do. Their root systems won't tear things up either. But they are a large growing tree, and not in my lifetime, but maybe in some other people's lifetime, it could be a problem. But this tree will be good here for another 25, 30, 40 years.
That's great. Thanks for sharing this information. We're now at the intersection of Bears Avenue and Lake Magdalene, and as you can see, we have this beautiful oak. Lori's going to tell us the amazing success story here and how they had to adjust the road really to save the tree, correct?
Absolutely. Probably going back almost 30 years. Bears Avenue used to be a two-lane road, one in each direction. And sometime in the late 80s, I believe, it was slated for widening because of all the growth in the area. Well, this particular tree was actually slated for removal because the road was going to take a different trajectory.
Interesting.
And working with the FDOT and whomever else was involved, Miss Carla Shelton was able to get them to shift the road slightly to the north and east so that this tree could be preserved. She's one of the largest trees in the area, and she happens to be a sister tree to the next tree we're going to that's right down the street.
so interesting. What an amazing success story. I love it.
Yeah, she continues to do pretty well. She's inside of a business on private property, so we didn't go in there to disturb anyone. But she does have people parking under her and compressing her roof, and she does really well. That's just a testament to how live oaks is so resilient and they're so strong.
And it's actually even been hit by a few cars through the years.
Oh, I'm sure it has, and probably lightning as well. They're pretty tough.
Very resilient. I love it. All right, thanks so much, Lori.
My pleasure.
We are now at Carrollwood Professional Center and taking a look at this massive oak and how they've been able to maintain it with cabling. Joe, tell us about the cabling on the base of the tree.
So this cabling is a great example of that when the structure of the tree has issues, but you still want to preserve it. There are certain cases where the expense and the science in doing this is worth it. The gentleman who did this is a renowned arborist locally, Bob Kyle. He's now deceased, but he spent much time with this tree, getting it right to make sure that if the pressure that was on these two trunks was attenuated through this cabling system. You'll also notice high in the canopy, there's also large cables. Those are adjustable, so they can be tightened or loosened as necessary. And then it's hard to make out, I'm sure, but within the tree there's also a lightning suppression system, so that if the tree were to be hit by lightning, it takes the lightning, which could be very damaging to a tree this size, but it is among the highest things in the landscape, but it sends those damaging charges into the ground and tries to mitigate them and reflect off of the tree instead of the tree absorbing that, which can kill it otherwise.
And Lori, you're thinking it might be about 250 years old?
Probably. It actually had 3 main stems at one time. So long before the area was developed, there's a stem on the far west side that was removed. And if you walk up here with me, you can see some old history where it did have a lightning strike. And there is a cavity in the center, which is a weak point. However, the cabling and bracing is what helps to stabilize these 2 giant leads. Just as a matter of curiosity, when you have a piece of live oak that's 36 inches in diameter, which these are greater than, 12 inches of a 36-inch piece of wood is 600 pounds. So you can only imagine the tonnage that is in this tree.
I had no idea. Wow.
You can see where the cabling has been calloused over with reactionary wound wood. It's just the tree trying to absorb whatever foreign object that's
Coming
on
at
it. You know?
Exactly.
There are a couple of galls, which is where there was an infection at one point, and that's where you get burled wood. So if and when this tree ever gets cut down, you would cut those 2 round anomalies off, and inside would be that beautiful burled wood that people often have on high-end luxury cars.
Oh, wow.
So please don't cut her down.
No, exactly. We want her up as long as she can.
Absolutely. The geometry is such that when you cable and brace, you have to have 2 competing vertical stands. So there's a lot of math that goes into figuring out the proper location, the type of cable and devices that are involved in cabling and bracing a tree like this.
It's just amazing.
But they are a living entity, and they do have a lifespan just like people do.
And when they developed here, there was no issue. They wanted to preserve everything.
Absolutely. This whole area, a lot of the trees were new, and this is how old this is. Look at the podocarpus. Those podocarpus are huge.
Yeah.
And now they're, they were planted when they were just little babies. just like this little oak over here. They did a really nice job in here. They've kept their trees. They keep up with their landscaping. They built this beautiful deck for people to come out and enjoy this tree. So my word to you is please enjoy her while she's here, because I've found trees, I've had trees dedicated for state champion, but sadly we've lost them already, or we'd love to show them to you.
Yeah.
So they do have a lifespan. Please keep that in mind. Don't put it off. Do it today. Go out and visit your trees.
I keep thinking this whole tour, if these trees could speak, what stories they could tell.
Oy
And
vey.
it's so important for us to preserve them and be respectful of them. And Joe and Lori, I want to thank you both on behalf of Do the Local Motion Tampa Bay and also the Downtown Partnership. We want to thank you so much for your time, for sharing your expertise and your passion for preservation of these beautiful trees. Thank you so very much.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for your interest, and we look forward to be able to do this again in person.
Okay,
But I
me
think
too.
this has afforded an opportunity that the standard walking tour downtown doesn't always. So.
Exactly. It was. I think it's great that we got to get out and see something different, as you referred to it as taking the show on the road. And so thank you for your flexibility and sharing your Saturday morning with us. We really, really appreciate it.
It's been our pleasure.